This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self.
Hey there, everybody. It's Rosie. My friends from Vital Work, Rebecca Johnson and Natalie Johnson, passionately help leaders and teams function at full capacity. This new series, Energy, Connection, and Courage at Work, breaks down those three elements essential to a thriving workplace. Take a listen.
Hello, and welcome to Energy, Connection, and Courage at Work. I am Natalie Johnson, and we are here today to talk about the topic of candor. And candor, in my own definition, is the act of being open, being really honest. And I always throw into being open and honest that candor is being open and honest, even when it's really difficult to be open and honest, because maybe you're not sure how another person might respond. And so we are really excited to be here today with Michelle Spehr. She's one of our team members. And then Rebecca Johnson is also joining us. And so the thing is when we have different people on the podcast, we give them an opportunity to choose different topics. And we gave Michelle a couple different topics to choose from, and she chose candor. And so I would love to start off with asking Michelle, why did you choose candor as the episode that you wanted to participate in?
Thanks, Natalie. My first thought when you asked me this question was, why candor? And it was, well, it just felt right. You know, when Rebecca gave me the list of topics, there really was no hesitation. It was what I call my full body yes. So I had to really kind of think about this and reflect on the why. And two things came up for me. This was interesting. One is I chose candor because I'm really fascinated by how people communicate and what gets in the way of understanding each other. And my interest in communication actually goes back to my college days. I got an undergraduate and my graduate degree in communication. And I remember even my parents used to tell people that I was majoring in talking. So it made sense to me that I would choose this podcast topic because candor, radical candor, is that skill set that I think we all can use to deliver messages or give feedback, particularly messages that feel difficult, like you said, in an effective way. And there was one other thing that came up for me as to why this felt like a natural topic for me. And that is because I have really defined my purpose as inspiring positive change by curating connections. And this topic, becoming confident in delivering messages that are radically candid, they support and align with my purpose of connecting people. So it's really all about talking in a way that both people in a conversation feel seen, valued, and heard.
Michelle, when we gave you that list to choose from, I was actually kind of secretly hoping that you would choose candor, because at that point, you and I, and Natalie was involved in this too, a few weeks prior to you choosing the topic of candor, we had had a really candid conversation. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I hope Michelle chooses that one. And I was thinking about the fact that we'd had this experience where you practiced candor with us in a way that I know was hard for you and was really good experience for all of us. So I wondered if you would share with our audience, you probably know what story I'm talking about. It happened a couple of months ago, and it had to do with a client situation. And I don't want to tell the story for you. So let me ask, do you know what story I'm talking about? And would you be willing to share that?
Yes, I do know which story that you're talking about. And I think the short version of it is my learning about a project proposal that had been sent to a client that I work pretty closely with a few months earlier, and me having a reaction to seeing it that was, whoa, something feels wrong here. And it was like, something is wrong here. And then I kind of had this feeling like, wait a minute, why didn't I know about this? And, I think what's really interesting when I reflect on, just kind of that moment in time is another reason why radical candor is so important to me or wanted to dig into this is kind of the neuroscience behind kind of what happens. I love to read a lot of books, and one of them I read recently is called Deliberate Calm. And they describe this experience where can you have such self-awareness that as if you were in this skylight above you, looking down, when you have a moment when you have that something feels wrong, and you can watch yourself. So I was kind of like watching myself. I'm like, something feels wrong. Something is wrong. Who's to blame? And then it went to, they are wrong. And then it was, I can't believe they wouldn't tell me about this project. And this topic of radical candor, I think, is really interesting because so I can look at myself. And another friend of mine, or a friend of mine, wrote a book called Brain On. And she talks a lot about when you can recognize when you get triggered, and then you can get to that point where you're watching yourself, kind of that micro viewing, that the shorter you can get that, kind of the more mature you're getting. I'm like, oh, look, I'm noticing myself, but you still feel kind of that uncomfortable. And so I was thinking about radical candor and that phrase, I can't believe you wouldn't tell me about this project, could have been a response that would have been challenging directly, but forgetting to care personally. And from a neuroscience standpoint, that's ineffective for a couple of reasons. One, it's mean, and mean just isn't a good tactic when it comes to teamwork and collaboration. But it's also ineffective because if I were to say that to either of you, I can't believe you didn't tell me about this project, what's happening in your brain is you automatically might go into self-protection mode. And you don't hear a single thing I say after that. So that's like ineffective communication right there.
That's so interesting because I'm thinking back to the day when you did say, hey, I wanted to talk with you about this experience I had. I learned about the project proposal with company XYZ, and there was something about that didn't feel right. And I wanted to talk to you about it. And I do remember feeling a little bit nervous and triggered, but being able to enter into the conversation with you and hear what you had to say because of the way that you started it. And if you had started it with, I just learned that client XYZ is going to do it. I can't believe you didn't tell me about that. I can completely imagine myself shutting down nearly to the point of not being able to hear or process what you had to say next, because you're right, I would have totally been in self-protection mode. And so what you're saying is reminding me that, when we talk about candor in our work with clients, we don't just talk about candor, we always talk about truth with care. And that with care part is super important. And it's something that you did well when you were bringing something to our attention, is you didn't just do the truth, but you did the truth with care.
One of the things, this is so interesting and helpful to listen to, because I think one of the things that is immediately coming up in my mind is the storytelling that can happen. The storytelling that could happen, maybe even, on your side, Michelle, of what's the reason why I wasn't included and why would no one mention this to me? And the story could go many different ways. They don't like me. They didn't think I was important. They didn't think I should be. It could be at all different things. And then even to the other side of what's the real story on the other side of that. And I think what I'm seeing and hearing in this conversation is, man, I could definitely see how that would happen. And I can see why, that didn't feel right to you and what stories could come up. But then in clarifying the stories, or even being the person on the other side of that and hearing that from you, I'm like, there was no story on the other side of that. It was 100% like just not good self-awareness and paying attention to details and kind of getting into that mode of, just go, working with the client. Now what's next? And not being aware enough to even know that anything happened at all. So what's coming up for me are just the stories that we can tell ourselves that actually make things worse, and how important it is to have candor and the ability to share in a way where others aren't armoring up, so you can really get to the heart of what's the actual truth.
Yeah, I was going back to kind of that rumination part of it. And that phrase really is telling, because I can say it in two ways. I can say, I can't believe you wouldn't tell me about this project. But if you really listen to the words, I can't believe you wouldn't tell me about the project, which is the other part of the story, which helped me to realize delivering the message of truth with care. It should have been a clue for me. I can't believe. Why can't I believe it? Well, I've never witnessed anything where you've intentionally left me out of a conversation that has been important. And I know from working with Rebecca for so long, she probably has, transparency as one of her core values. So I can't believe should have been a clue like there's something else going on here. And so I think what I ended up saying was something like, I believe that you and Natalie would not intentionally leave me out of a conversation if you knew it was important to me that I was involved. And so it was kind of the both of those. But that was really interesting, even just in preparing for the podcast. It's almost like a lesson for me will be if I'm ever saying, have either of you ever said something when you were upset? Like, I can't believe fill in the blank.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's like a little clue for me. Like, hey, if I'm saying I can't believe it, maybe I don't believe it because it's not true.
Yeah, or because it doesn't line up with the experience I've had. So I think what you did there is that you were, because you were at the point in your life where you can see yourself getting triggered, there was enough space for you to say, wait, let me pause with my own story. Instead of focusing on the, you didn't share with me, and that means you're to blame, you focused on the, I can't believe part. Let me spend some time with my story and make sure that I'm approaching this conversation from a standpoint of curiosity and judgment. Curiosity instead of judgment. Like, I wonder why this happened is, I think, generally a much better place to start a conversation than, why did you do this? Michelle, one of the challenges about doing short podcasts is that I love all of these conversations so much. And I think Natalie and I both end up feeling like there's so much more that we could say around it. But one of the things we do like to do in these conversations is always tie back whatever topic we're talking about to energy, connection, and courage, because that's kind of at the heart of the work we do with clients. So I'm just curious, when you think about energy, connection, and courage, what are your thoughts on how practicing candor is related to any or all of those?
I think the energy is one of the things that stood out to me, particularly in this situation, or I'll use this situation as an example. If I would have decided not to say anything, maybe because I would be fearful that you would see me as an uncooperative or a difficult team member, that would have taken energy because what I would have been portraying would have been like everything's fine, but it would have been a disconnect with an internal thing like, hey, I'm still feeling this isn't fine. And that is draining energy. Or if I would have withheld and not said anything because I wouldn't want to hurt your feelings, like, oh, I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. Like, I'm saying that they're not doing their job well or something like that. That too would have been incongruent. So I would have had like, this mask on like, hey, everything's fine. So I think the big lesson for me as it relates to those three domains is mostly the energy. I think also related to that is once you recognize, hey, I was activated, I was triggered, and you can move beyond that and not ruminate, that also helps with energy and maintaining your energy. So those are the two things that stand out there for me. It helped maintain my energy. I didn't get depleted because I didn't have to put on a front that emotional drain that it would have been. And I didn't spend time going over and over to Natalie's points. What are the stories? Why would they do this? That type of thing.
The other thing that I'm finding about candor, because candor is probably maybe like one of the most important focus points in my life over the last few years, is just being honest with anybody I can be honest with as much as I can be honest, is that it also actually leads to greater connection. Because when there's some unresolved tension between two people, even tension that one person doesn't even know exists, in my experience anyway, I feel disconnected from them. And if I can get through a candid conversation honestly, and the other person receives it even remotely well, I feel closer to them. I don't know. Do either of you have that experience?
For sure. I definitely have that experience. And it's so interesting to me right now to hear Michelle talk about how this candid conversation in particular impacted her energy. And then, Rebecca, you bring up how these candid conversations can feel like we're disconnected, but at first, and then we lean into having them and we feel that connection. And the thing that comes up for me, especially around this whole conversation, well, how does this candid conversation relate to energy, connection, and courage? For me, I immediately go to courage. It's courage. It took courage for Michelle to come forward and step out of that rumination and storytelling and think about what's actually happening in the moment and actually come and have the candid conversation. And we often talk in different trainings that we do that being vulnerable in that way and feeling uncertain can feel really, really scary to the person doing it, but it actually looks like courage to other people. And that's what I see. Like that to me, like that was all courage, which certainly contributes to connection as well. But interesting that both of you brought up energy and connection. And I'm like, no, that was courage.
It's all three, as everything is. I think that's why we landed on energy, connection, and courage, because just all the work we do with people in any environment involves energy, connection, and courage. They're so intertwined. Well, Michelle, thank you for being willing to tell your story. And thank you for months ago when you needed to have that hard conversation, having it. I think every time one of us on the team has a hard conversation with another person, we all just get a little bit better at doing it. And we're kind of doing the work of nurturing the culture we want. So the last thing I'm going to ask you is we like to leave our audience with a one big thing, and that's just a little tiny takeaway, a nugget. If they were just going to think about one idea or do one thing as a result of this conversation on Candor, what that might be. What are your thoughts on what their one big thing could be today?
I think their one big thing could be recognizing the opportunity to check and see how a message lands with someone by maybe even planning in advance some follow-up questions after a radical candor message is delivered. So I know I had used a couple follow-up questions with you, Rebecca, after the message, and it was more like, what else do I need to understand about the situation that I don't know yet? And what are your reactions to what I just shared? And I know in many of the trainings that we do offer some sample questions that people can use to just get more information. It goes back to the two-way communication. Did my message land the way I intended it to? And then also, can I be open to receiving feedback and other information from the person that I'm interacting with? So I think, those follow-up questions.
I remember you did ask those of me, and I remember feeling like, I know this is what we teach people to do, but it feels really good that I'm being given the opportunity to answer those questions. We actually have those questions on a one-pager that we'll have in the show notes that people can download if they want. And if you don't want to download the one-pager, you can even just consider the two questions that Michelle shared. What are your reactions to this? And what else do I need to know that I don't yet? And that brings us to my favorite part of the show that I think everybody else thinks is a little bit less interesting and entertaining than I do, but it is our, we don't have a name for it because I like to call it secrets. Natalie calls it like the interesting tidbit, but it's the one thing we each share something new on the show that most people don't know about us. It could be a little tiny thing like you love turkey sandwiches or a big thing, whatever. Natalie, Michelle, which one of you wants to go first?
Well, I'd love to go first. And if you guys are game, it might be fun to use the sentence stem, if you really knew me. I know that's something we use with some of our teams on just to create more connection. And it can be fun, it can be lighthearted, it can be more serious. So my if you really knew me statement would be that if you really knew me, you would know that I started my undergraduate studies in computer science. And back in the day, that's what they called it before it was like information technology. But 3 semesters in, it became very clear that degree was not for me. I got several clues. One was that I took the second semester of calculus twice, and it wasn't because I enjoyed it so much the first time. So I had a paper copy of the college course directory or, degrees. And so I was at computer science, and back then they were paper, they weren't online. And I saw communication right before there. So it was alphabetical. So maybe it was just like luck, I don't know, computer science, communication. I was like, this looks interesting. So I switched my focus from computer science to communication. And it's because I'm more energized by people than programming and much more comfortable with verbal words than numbers.
Love it. You're such a people person too. I can't even imagine you spending that incredible people, talented energy you have on computers. Good switch. Good thing that was next in line.
I have a lot today that are popping into my mind, but I'm going to go with, if you really knew me, you would know that I'm obsessed with finding the most sour candy possible in the world. And I do a lot of research on different types of sour candy, and Amazon sometimes has some really good stuff. But I love to get the sour candy, and I love sour candy. That's where it started. But I love to give it to other people and like watch what happens. I have a stash of sour candy right now where it's called like super sour raspberry blah, blah, blahs and a super sour pickle something, something. And I like to watch people try to consume those or have a contest. Who can keep this in their mouth the longest? But I'm on Amazon at least once a week researching where the most sour candy can be found and how I can get some.
Oh, you have to tell me what you find out because my kids love sour candy and I can feel my jowls like tightening up just even thinking about sour candy. It's so weird. All right. Mine is, I was going to go with calculus and then I was going to go with food. I'm going to go with when I was 23 and had begun my practice of yoga, I decided that I wanted to learn how to teach a yoga session for real. Like I wanted to get the real deal, the spiritual stuff, all the things. So I paid $2,500 on a credit card to go sign up for this yoga ashram in the Bahamas to go spend a month there to learn how to teach a real yoga class. And I was excited because it was supposed to be Swami Shivananda who was leading the retreat. And when I got there, Swami Shivananda was ill. So the guy running the retreat was this person, Ted, from like the Yoga Fit gym in Brooklyn. And because of that and a whole bunch of other things, like the fact that they asked us to stay up all night chanting around a fireplace and we were very disapproved of if we went to bed, I was like, this is not for me. So 2 weeks in, I called the airline and I was like, get me the heck out of here. So I never got my certificate and I went on to teach yoga anyway. Just the last thing, that ashram, which was a place of serenity, was right next door on the island in the Bahamas to a Club Med, which is like loud drinking, partying. So we'd all be in our little tents at 9:00 at night listening to the bass of Club Med next door.
Club Med was where I was, Rebecca.
Having fun.
Having fun. Well, I love it. Thank you, both of you, for sharing. And Michelle, really, thank you for being here as our guest and also being willing to come and share our real life story of Candor at Vital Work. And so with that, thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode of Energy, Connection, and Courage at Work.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.